SJ says, so I'm sure you know of the gentle parenting movement. Basically, no spanking or hitting your kid as a discipline. I remember this kind of starting when I was a teen, but Christians would say, spare the rod, spoil the child. However, that is not in the Bible. But what that is loosely referring to is Proverbs 13:24. I heard one say that the rod is really a shepherd's rod, which was used to guide the sheep, not punish them. What are your thoughts? So I've heard all of these arguments. And I think in context, it's really hard to make the case that it's a shepherd's rod. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. I mean, look, the Bible, especially in proverbial sections like this, is caught up with parallels. Okay, so this is parallelism. Whoever spares the rod hates the son. What does he mean? Well, he tells you in the second verse, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. Okay, so here the rod refers to discipline. Now, one could say, yeah, that's disciplining in a loving way by guiding him along, etc., right? Feels like a stretch. Now, I don't know for sure. Let's go ahead and pull up some Bible background commentaries. So let's try the Baker Illustrated. The one who will not use the rod hates his son. Corporal discipline using a rigid staff, also mentioned in 1925, 29, 2030, 22:15, 23:13-14, 26:3, 29:15. This was viewed in the ancient Near East not as child abuse, but as a protective demonstration of parental love. For example, an ancient Aramaic text makes a similar statement. Do not keep your son from the rod. If you are not able to save him from wickedness, if I beat you, my son, you will not die. That's from an Aramaic text. The passing on of cultural values took place primarily in the home and thus was the parent's responsibility. Let's try 1925. Strike a scoffer, and the simple will learn prudence. Reprove a man of understanding, and he will gain knowledge. 29. Condemnation is ready for scoffers, beating for the backs of fools. 20:30. Blows that wound cleanse away evil. Strokes make clean the innermost parts. 22:15. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him. 23:13-14. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. Well, there you go. Seems pretty straightforward to me. If you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul from Sheol. SJ, that's just an example of eisegetically reading what you want to be true into the text. Just because the word rod in one context is used as a shepherd's rod to guide somebody doesn't mean it can't be used to strike somebody with a blow in another passage. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul from Sheol. It's special pleading. I want this to be true, so I'm going to try to make it true, right? I mean, it's verse after verse, okay? A whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the backs of fools. 29:15. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We read 8 verses, and 3 or 4 of them explicitly reference striking blows. We need to make sure that we are applying the principle of the text, not necessarily its direct saying. What is the principle of the text? Discipline your children. That could be plain. That's plain as day. It couldn't be more obvious. You are meant to discipline your children. Now, how are we to discipline our children? I do not think that just reading Proverbs 29:15 and saying, look, you're supposed to use the rod and strike them, is a good way to read your Bible. I don't think that's good exegesis. And that's not how we read many other passages in texts. Okay? So, what is Proverbs? Proverbs is wisdom literature. What is wisdom literature? If you conduct yourself in this manner, it will generally go well for you. If you don't conduct yourself in this manner, it will not go well for you. So, it's wisdom literature, which means these are general principles for living life well. That's the first thing that needs to be noted. And the principle is discipline your children. Now, how do we go about disciplining our children? Well, that is where the conversation lies. Now, I certainly don't think anybody has a way of saying never ever spank, or it would be really hard to get around these Bible references with a Christian approach that says you should never spank. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with the rod, he will not die. If you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul from Sheol. So I find it very difficult for anybody who has a high view of the scriptures to come along and say, you should never spank, that's ungodly, that's not right. That's taking it too far. But I also think that the reverse is true. I also don't think you can appeal to this text and say, look, you must spank your children. I don't think that's what it's teaching. It's saying you must discipline your children, but how you go about doing that discipline is, I believe, up for discussion. So that's where I would land on the topic, SJ. It's a good question, but I think there are too many proverbs that seem to indicate that physical discipline is appropriate sometimes.